Welcome to this session of the Cassini Ireland Hackathon, live from the National Space Centre at Elfordstown Earth Station in Cork. Brought to you in partnership with Munster Technological University and Blackrock Castle Observatory, and proudly sponsored by Black Knight. Cassini is the European Commission's new programme to support space-based entrepreneurs. Our theme is Digitising Green Spaces, using satellite data and signals to discover your city, stay fit and healthy, and protect our rural areas. Join the Cassini Hackathon to solve global challenges and design the future of green spaces.
Welcome everybody to this evening session on green businesses and the green business landscape in Ireland. And we are hosted by Mary Carty from Wilson and Keys, who is here to lead us through a talk and some exercises. And Mary, you're ready to go, and you can share your screen and off we go.
Hi everyone, just give this a second to upload. We'll get started. Can everybody see that okay? Give me a thumbs up or a nod of life. Are we good? All right. Okay, so today we're going to talk about digitising green spaces using Earth observational data. And we're also going to talk about the Sustainable Development Goals. Right, so what are we going to talk about? So I'm Mary, and it is really lovely to have you all here with us today. Thank you for coming, and it's a nice evening, and we appreciate everybody being here. So what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about the Sustainable Development Goals. We're going to talk about, there are some, I suppose, criticisms around the Sustainable Development Goals, and we're going to talk about that briefly. And then I'd like to introduce you to the Earth Charter. And I don't know if any of you heard about the Earth Charter, and it has a very specific, I suppose, promotion of social justice, among other things. I'll talk about that a little bit as well. And for any of you who have studied systems thinking, has anybody studied systems thinking? Systems philosophy. We'll talk about that too and why that's important to this topic. And then I'm going to show you some business examples, Irish ones predominantly, and then also refer to other businesses globally that are using this type of data to build businesses and initiatives. And then some, I suppose, projects as well that I've come across. Then I'm going to set you a challenge. So be ready. And then hopefully we'll get some feedback. And then finally, there's going to be a mentoring session. And we'll agree around the date and the time for that. So is everybody ready?
I'm ready.
All right. All right. Thank you, Sabrina, as well, for putting this together. Absolutely. Okay, so Digitising Green Spaces, this Cassini Hackathon, it is very much thinking about and linked to the Sustainable Development Goals. But why do we have the Sustainable Development Goals in the first place? Well, they've been ratified by the United Nations. And as you can see, there are 17 of them there, and they're to do with things like climate action, justice, sustainable development. And this is incredibly important because we need to think about how we are going to have a just transition where people have equal opportunity. And I suppose how other places and people need to think about what we do in the world to give others a chance. At the rate that we are devouring the earth at the moment, it would take 3.5 times the Earth's resources to sustain who we are now. So we have very little time to get to the point of zero carbon by 2030. So this is under the new EU programme around the new EU Green Deal, which I'm sure some of you have heard about. And then furthermore, the new European Bauhaus then, the challenge is to root that new behavioural change in culture and practice, all right? Now, if any of you have looked at the Sustainable Development Goals, some people feel that in many ways they don't go far enough. And a lot of people have a problem with this notion of sustainable development, and that notion that it is an oxymoron. How do you develop and be sustainable? So I'd like to introduce you to the Earth Charter. So if anyone has come across this before, I absolutely think you should have a look at it. And if you look at the pillars here, you can see where they all interact. So respect and care for the community of life. Now, the community of life, according to the Earth Charter, is everything and everyone. Because we often talk about human-centered design. And when we talk about that, that's absolutely fine. But we forget about the other elements, plants, and life that make up the world and our interdependence on it. So the next pillar is this notion of ecological integrity. The third pillar is social and economic justice. And then the last one is democracy and peace. So you can see that the Earth Charter is really interesting in how all of these different pillars dovetail. It's been around since the 90s, and it's been endorsed by UNESCO. And when you're considering the Sustainable Development Goals, please have a look at the Earth Charter. You can become a signatory as a person, an organization, an individual. And if you go online, there is an introduction to the Earth Charter. That's a couple of modules that you can do online. I like the language, and I like the notion of people and place and the whole community of life. Okay, so I hope that's useful for you. If you have any questions about this, please ask when I finish the presentation. So when we are thinking now about how we can use Earth observational data, who has done this type of work before and in Ireland? So there's a business called the Icon Group. And very recently, they won a tender working with 20 EU countries to look at the environment of the river basin of the Danube, which is an incredible thing to do. They're looking at things like trees, forests, animal diseases, hedgerows, water pollution, and how that whole river basin is used and supported across many different regions. And the Icon Group have done many other type of work using Earth observational data. Really interesting. And again, this notion that this data crosses borders, it crosses countries, it impacts all of us. So a project like this is really interesting. A lot of opportunity there. Actually, the other thing, sorry, I'm just going to go back. The other thing here that's interesting about this particular group, they are also looking at mapping farmland across the EU. So if anybody here comes from a farming background, I'm sure you've come across something called a CAP, and that's the payments that they make to farmers. And there may well be a time when all these payments for your farm will be automated based on the size of your farm and your holding using this data. What do you think of that? And again, this company is working on those types of solutions. I don't know why this is jumping around the place on me. All right, the next thing I wanted to talk to you about is systems thinking. So why is systems thinking important?
Mary, you're still on the Icon Group slide.
I know, and it's just not advancing for me. I don't know why.
Okay.
All right, okay.
There we go.
There we go, thank you. So I'll tell you what, let's give you another couple of examples and I'll jump back to systems thinking. Right, so this one here, this tourism one, basically mapped a whole area in Portugal to see what type of tourism, the amount of people, the amount of transport, the amount of activity that tourism creates, if and how it works, and how much of it this particular place could take. And you can see that a project like that would work again in like local regions, towns and cities, bigger regions, and countries. So if you think of particular areas that are, you know, incredibly, I suppose, famous, or they are visited a lot. I'm thinking of Venice. and how in many communities there's huge pushback now to this mass tourism. During the week, I'm not sure if you heard it, a cruise ship pulled up in Venice, and the local people were really upset about that. Obviously because of COVID and many different things, and also asking about how much damage does these things do to their local environment. So that's another really interesting project. Closer to home in Ireland, TechWorks Marine, they are looking at things like pollution, water quality, and particularly, Sabrina, you'll be happy to hear this, in Cork. So they are looking after that whole river management system. So what you're finding now is a lot of local authorities and government agencies are working with businesses like this to map and manage their activities, things like sanitation and water quality, blue flag, all of that type of stuff. This one here, tree metrics, pretty much does what it says on the tin. It looks after forests, large forests and small forests. And what I didn't realize, if you have a forest fire, depending on the type of forest, you're not going to see that fire until it really takes hold. And if you're thinking about places like California, where they lost so much forest last year, or even closer to home in Kerry with the fires that burned on the mountains there, an application like that becomes really useful. They can also map things like hedgerows and what type of specimens are in your hedgerows. I suppose the quality of the growth, things like logging, and also the management. So in Ireland, we're trying to move from clear fell, which is completely mow everything down, cut everything down, to a more managed system where we grow continuous cover forestry, which is incredibly important for sustainability, biodiversity, and I suppose to plant more trees that are more of this climate, of this place. And we all know what has happened because we've planted, you know, single specimen forests in the country. We know what that has contributed to for biodiversity loss. So a company like that then can actually watch the management and transformation, where you transform one type of forest into a more, I suppose, holistic approach with different types of species and different types of trees. Important.
Can I just add one thing, which is that Tree Metrics is a client of the National Space Center, and I love them. I think they're my second favorite satellite data company. And one of the things that I think is super cool about what they do is that you can basically map your forest, and they will use Earth observation data to help you value it as well, which is incredibly important for the balance of new growth and old growth, and being able to put in new growth and preserve your old growth. It's just such a cool way to use Earth observation data, and they're based here in Cork, and they're very lovely. Just in case anybody wants to go try to get an internship with them, I would highly recommend them.
Well, Cork is well represented here, Sabrina. That wasn't planned. But again, I mean, these things are really important. This is about insight. I mean, if you're managing a forest, you want to take out the weaker trees. You want to make sure that you've got very strong tree growth. And if we are going to be sustainable as a country, we can't be taking in wood from Norway or wherever else. And we now know that things like ash dieback, where our native ash tree is dying, is because other tree species were taken in with all sorts of things with them that has now contributed to things like in the future we may not have hurleys made out of ash. So people like Tree Metrics are helping us figure out how to plan and manage our natural resources in a much more holistic way. Sabrina, is there anything else you want to add there?
No, that's literally everything I know about trees.
If you want to know about trees, please follow Dr. Kathy Fitzgerald. She's an absolute whiz on all of that. Right, now, I'm going to present you with a challenge. Sabrina came to me a few weeks back and she said, Mary, would you like to get involved in this hackathon? And I said, sure, absolutely. And then she said, I'd really like you to set the team a challenge. And I was like, okay. And I went for a walk here. This is my local beach. This is what it looks like from up there. I live in County Meath, and not many people know that County Meath has a teeny tiny bit of coastline. And that coastline runs down over a few villages. So if you were to walk this coastline, you would get all the way down to Clogherhead on one side, and you would almost, if the tide is out, manage to get up to Balbriggan in Dublin. That is about the best map I could find, lads, so sorry about that. So Clogherhead is here, Baltray is there, if anyone plays golf. This is the mouth of the River Boyne here, and these are my local villages. And here at Laytown, the River Nanny comes out. Now, what happened that day that Sabrina asked me to give you a challenge? I watched a few people try to figure out where to place the bins, because the summer season is coming and they are setting up the lifeguard station. And nobody seemed to know where to put them. And unfortunately, as you can see from this picture here, we have had a whole lot of coastal erosion. So these gabions here have broken and they've washed out the stone that was in here to protect the dunes. Further down, the dunes have been completely washed away. So what's going to happen to the bins? Recently, last couple of weeks, they've installed these two bad boys with this sign on it to say, please pick up 2 or 3 pieces of litter as you go and be nice to the environment. Now, my challenge, and I've got 2 of them, so you can choose whichever one you feel like. I would like you to think about how we could use that Earth observation data to place those bins in the best possible position. And if that's not what you're into, I would like you to consider how, using Earth observational data, could we actually help preserve these dunes and not to see destruction like this. Are you up for the challenge?
I am. And
Good.
let's bring loads of people along with us. But sorry, is that thing that looks like a missile a bin?
A bin.
That's
Yep.
a bin.
Both of them are bins. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
I think they are crudely meant to be shaped like a bottle, but I don't think they really got there. That's the idea.
Not a bottle. Okay. Anyway. Sure. All right.
All right.
Okay.
So, could we use sensors, Earth observational data? What could we do to make the best possible decision and not guesswork as to where we place these things?
Okay.
Do you want us to have like just an open discussion on this, or is this chatting, or in the chat or something?
Well, let's have a discussion. There aren't
Let's
that
have a
many of us.
discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also, what are the things we need to think about before we make decisions like this?
How do people access the beaches here? Is it like you drive into a parking lot and then access from there, or is this just adjacent to a town?
Right. So you've now asked the question that started the war. Over COVID, there used to be parking on this part of the beach, just a teeny piece here in Bettystown.
We don't see your cursor, sorry.
Just where Bettystown is there, people used to be able to park on a tiny bit of that stretch of beach. Now they've closed it off, so the entrance to that beach is now a path. There's 2 or 3 different paths along the length of that beach. So we'll say from number 4 down to number 6, there are probably 4 or 5 different paths that you can walk down onto that beach.
Are they council paths or are they like desire paths? Are they people just tromping through the dunes?
Some of them are paths that are pedestrian paths that are maintained by the council. And then there's one path that has access for cars, like council cars or whatever else to go down.
So they're all official paths?
They're all official paths, yes. Because there's housing all along that beach, along here, along by the Strand.
Right.
Most of the beach faces on, the back faces onto housing.
Huh. Okay. Paul, do you have thoughts?
Doesn't look like Paul's microphone is connected.
Okay.
I don't see it on the list of participants.
All right,
the microphone.
cool. Well, Cyril, what do you think?
I mean, I don't think anything's going to replace local observation, but if we're going to do it from space, we'll do it from space. Yeah, I mean, along the paths seems to be the opportunity. It's what do we call it? It's a constraint point where most people are going to come through, so it's going to be efficient. I guess whether you want to put it closer to the water, or closer to the road, or wherever the town, that's maybe a logistics question. And also maybe people are less willing to carry trash a long time. You'd have to see. But yeah, along the paths makes sense to me.
But I also think, from my experience in a beach community, that, I mean, I grew up on a beach community with boardwalks that were literal access points. So the only way onto the beach that wasn't through private property was across a boardwalk with stairs at the end. And so those would be the access points that were available for the beach. And from my experience, people don't actually always want to congregate there. They spread out from the access points. So I would be curious to know if it's possible to use Earth observation data to map not the static parts of the beach, but the migration of people. Like, how do the people disperse themselves across from point, from between point 3 and point 6 on that map? Because I would be more inclined to put bins at points of dispersal density, which is a term I maybe just made up. But I don't know, but I don't have a background in this, so I don't know if that's nothing but it's sort of experiential on my part. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
And could you also use observation data to kind of see, like you're saying, where people park, what patterns are around that, and yeah, if people are maybe illegally parking or parking on places they shouldn't, but that might still be informed where you could put bins. And maybe people have rubbish in their car that they just want to get rid of it when they get out of the car, or things like that could maybe help with the observation data as well.
That would be incredibly useful, because what you find here in the summertime is, this place gets incredibly cramped and busy, and all the access roads going to that beach will have trash thrown into them. So that's a fantastic suggestion. Yeah.
Wait, people throw trash on the road?
Yeah, into the hedgerows and the side of the road. Yeah.
That's charming.
Lovely. Is there anything else we need to think about?
Tides.
Yes. Yes.
So does the beach go all the way up to the dune line there?
Yes.
Okay. So you're going to have to place the bins on the pathways, because you can't place them at points of congregation on the beach. Is there some... Wait, we could develop a different kind of bin.
Yes. Yes. So currently on the bin, you will see those big wheelie bins, the industrial size ones, and they're on wheels. So that might be a slight problem if we get a high wind.
It's like industrial designers learned nothing from their children's trampolines.
No. No. And by the way, the bins they currently have, there is no strap on them. There is no, I'm thinking about, if anybody climbs mountains, you know how you have your caravan or things like that? If you had something like that on the bin that would just click the top of it and close it. So lid's not going to blow off and everything's not going to end up in the sea. Surely we can do better.
Cool. Okay. So if nothing else, somebody at this hackathon can come out of this with a career in better bin manufacturing. I mean, all our county councils are buying our bins from somewhere. It's not like they're making them locally. So we could produce bins that don't suck. That would be a really...
I mean, the other thing too to think about is, yes, people's pattern. Could we actually track people's pattern to a fixed position to find out how often they use a particular utility?
Sure. Like Earth observation data can do that. What utility are they using? Sorry, you lost me there.
It could be a bin, it could be a bathroom, it could be anything that would help that user experience. It could be a place that they put their surfboards or bodyboards or...
The loo point is a good point. What is the public restroom facility? There isn't one.
There's one.
Okay.
There is one public restroom facility in Laytown that's just off the beach.
Okay.
And then there's one other public restroom facility in the village in Bettystown, but you need to come off the beach to use that.
Okay.
And that's it.
Looking at Google Maps here, I see that a lot of people actually drive onto the beaches as well.
They can't anymore because of COVID. That's been stopped.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, just in the last year. But up to last year, yes, it would be crammed with cars. That's finished now.
I'm sorry, people actually drove onto the beach. Is that not illegal?
Not here. There was nowhere else for them to park. So if you wanted to come to the beach, there was nowhere else for you to park. So that's the only place you could go. So a section of the beach you were allowed to park on.
Oh my God. Cool. Thank you for the map. That's
amazing. Thank you. How can we do these things which are really, day to day, a public service? We all need it. How do we make these decisions based on better data rather than a hunch? Or, well, that's where we always put it. Or that's how we've always used this beach. How do we do that? And surely we can, because for me, the wonderful thing about Earth observation data for me gives me an opportunity to look at the past and to create models for the future. So, to me, I think these are two very fundamental things that we can look at. If we place sensors in those dunes or along that path, we can count footfall. We can figure out how much of that sand is being washed from one part of the beach to another. Surely that's got to give us a better reference point to make better decisions.
Wow, sorry, I'm looking at the photo, the cars on the beach, and I'm just reeling in disbelief.
Well, it doesn't happen anymore, so...
Okay.
But that was the history, yes, definitely.
Wow.
Are there other things that we could use Earth observational data for this ecosystem, for this place, that would enhance both, we'll say, the business communities, the quality of life? We talked about the Earth Charter earlier. Very much that whole notion is around the quality of life for people and planet and place. Because I suppose access is huge. If you are on crutches or you're pushing a buggy or you're in a wheelchair, it's incredibly difficult to get down there. It's not very easy. And again, could we use this data to inform where is the best place for that, or how people can actually negotiate and have access, equal access and opportunity?
Yeah, it's funny to say that, because I think in some ways it's curious. I wonder who's getting reduced access due to the removing of the parking on the beach. Because if you look at the cost of the houses that are next to the beach, I'm just simplifying things here, but I assume that there's higher property values along the beaches, and people from inland who had, again, I'm generalizing, I don't know the location, lower cost housing, or maybe driving into the beach, and that was actually more equitable due to that. And all of a sudden, we're reducing their access, and I don't see any spot for them to park now. So maybe it's like, it's good for the environment. People are happy. Or people that we've surveyed, like we maybe see revulsion. We see cars on the beach, but yeah, there's this whole other side to it.
And the accessibility, the actual accessibility side of it.
Yeah. In the last 3 years, in this area, Laytown, Bettystown, Mornington, this is Eastmeath. So it's a satellite of Dublin. So the commuter belt here is huge. They built something like 3,500 houses in that stretch in the last couple of years alone. So they all used to be standalone wee villages. They're now nearly all connected together. So the pace of change in this, which was an incredibly rural area until recently, has been incredible. So you've got people from North Dublin who want to come to the beach, or Louth. Drogheda is 5 kilometres away, 7 kilometres away, and the rest of County Meath. You know, who gets access? Who doesn't? How do we give people equal opportunity? And, you know, can this data set that's open source help us make that more equitable, or should we?
I mean, there's an argument to be made that nobody should have access to the beach. Like, if we don't treat it nicely, then we don't get any. I don't know, but I don't.
Maybe.
I don't know.
Maybe. And then there's another fundamental question here too. When you thinking about tree metrics and you think about beach management, Fingal just this week announced a new beach management plan. Most local authorities, when they manage a beach, they use this huge, big, clunky piece of machinery that, if you grew up on a farm, it nearly looks like a combine harvester or something like that, or like a rotator thing. That's the only way I can explain it. It's like this huge, big rotator. And it drives along the beach, and it picks up everything, and it rotates it, and it goes into a trailer at the back. But everything goes in. The seaweed, the plants, everything goes in the back. Because there's no way to distinguish the litter from the biological matter. So Fingal this week has launched a new plan where they're not going to use that mechanical device to actually clean the beach. And instead, they've taken in a lot more volunteers and many others to actually manually pick up the rubbish and whatever else, or whatever else is washed onto that beach that shouldn't be there. Because the thinking is, if they leave that material on the beach, the plants, the seaweed, in time it beds down, and it actually stops coastal erosion, and it helps the formation of marram grass and other types of grasses and plants that, you know, connect that sand together and hold it and keep it. So our mechanical means of cleaning our mess causes another mess. So, I mean, I think, again, these data sets can help us manage these environments that are much closer to nature, less obtrusive and less damaging. And also maybe to track and trace what is the best time to send the volunteers out to pick up whatever needs to be picked up.
That's really clever.
It feels like before we start doing kind of some spatial analysis or some space data analysis, that we need to come up with like a policy plan or something first, you know, like I don't know if we just go for like a space solution and then you kind of approach policy people and be like, here, we have this solution. They're going to be like, no, we're on a completely different page. Like, you know, like
yeah.
Should we engage first with policy first? And like you mentioned earlier, Sabrina, you know, restrict access to the beach to all people. Like, obviously not feasible, but there might be some perspectives where we have to kind of see where we can intervene through space data.
Yeah.
I mean, the other thing too, I mean, bringing it this conversation, you're dead right, bringing it back to that notion of systems thinking, right? We all need to develop systems literacy. Why? What's a system? Okay, so the simplest one to think of is you go to the market, farmers market, for example. You got buyers and sellers, right? That's a system. It works. It's beautiful. Everybody works in concert. You take away, something happens that the farmers suddenly can't sell their produce on Saturday. The system's broken and gone. And for a very long time, we have been incredibly good at looking at the problem and coming up with a solution, either by using tech or whatever else. But we don't actually look at the cause, and we don't actually look at the systems, the ones that we see and the ones that we don't see, that are connected, that make, you know, this life of ours possible. So you're right. So how do we actually develop a literacy to understand that if we come up with a solution to something, yes, there's unintended consequences. There is an ethical piece. There's a social justice piece. There's an environmental and ecological and a rights-based piece. And I think that if we think about systems and we think about how they're created, and we respect the non-human systems as much as we've given ourselves precedent, I think we're better off. And I think the other thing to always remember, every business model is a philosophy. Every business model is a philosophy. So you build something, you got to ask yourself the question, what's the quality of life are these folks going to have if they work for me? You know, what does it contribute to? And will it actually support the whole community of life? Or will it still be extractive? So I suppose when we're thinking about the Sustainable Development Goals and this project and the Earth Charter too, these are the questions we have to think about, because otherwise we build more of the same. That's just more conquest culture, not really solutions at all.
Well, thanks, Mary. That was uplifting. That's great. We're supposed to be improving the planet through Earth observation data, not making people want to flee to Mars.
No, we can. That's what I'm saying. This is the beauty of it. Like, if we think about these things in concert with the data that we have, and we think about it using these lenses, I think we build much better, much more sustainable, much more holistic and better things for all of us. I think it's incredibly positive, and I think it's a really, really good thing.
Yeah, no, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was saying, yeah, like, it is a really, really healthy way to look at it. And even if we go back to even the litter issue identified initially, like, if you're able to use that data and maybe more local data as well, like observational, and let's say you can see there's a, you know, proliferation of plastic bottles, and then if you bring that data to the council and then go, well, maybe they could actually install water fountains so people wouldn't need to throw away their plastic bottles, you know. So it's looking, as you said, that wider lens, at a broader kind of solution than just, there's the problem, let's fix it.
Yes. And the thing is, I think if you look at, you know, we have a huge opportunity to do really interesting, solve global problems in a way that's sensitive to what's going on. And include all voices and people's voices and the rest of the community of life. We can involve those voices if we are brave enough and sensitive enough to do so. I think that's pretty wonderful. But it's how we do it, and it's the insights we gain from that will give us, I suppose, a better handle on what we should do and how we should do it.
I think one of the upsides for that's not often noted about Earth observation data is that, I mean, there's always bias in interpretation, but one of the things that it does is help us easily remove our bias. So in this case, we would be auditing who actually uses the beach where to determine how we're going to help whoever is accessing the beach do so in a way that's ecologically appropriate, and how we manage that, you know, entrance and egress. Whereas if you do something like, you know, go into the town and survey people there about who uses the town, you're going to get a very different demographic of people who live along the beach and work along the beach and own businesses along the beach versus people who may actually use that amenity. And I like the fact that we can use data to count individual people, like down to individual heads seen from overhead. I think it's just a very cool way to gather data, and it removes a lot of data gathering bias, although obviously you can still have bias in your interpretation.
There will always be people who will never participate in these types of conversations for one reason or another. But also I think it gives us a chance to look at the broader picture. Tides, wind, usage. I mean, there is in Clogherhead, actually, if you look at that map there, there's a sanctuary for the little tern there, the birds, and they've done really well. It's a spot that it's a wintering spot for them, and in the springtime. And some of that beach is actually cordoned off at certain times of the year while they nest. And with education, people know and they stay away. And there's a really good relationship. So I suppose what I'm talking about here, I think, is that notion of relationship and interdependence, and how we can be incredibly mindful and also solve problems by looking at it. Is there anything you think you should not do in a case like this? What would be absolute no-no approaching a problem like this?
In terms of locating garbages?
We'll say in terms of managing this ecosystem, or access, all those different uses for this. What should we not do?
Ignore public input.
Maybe. Yep. I suppose I'm thinking very much about, I suppose we come from a culture that in many ways imposes a top-down solutions, you know, not just in Ireland, but in many countries it comes to, well, we know best and this is what's going to happen. So, you know, bringing in other voices and casting a wider net, sorry, I couldn't help myself, is really useful. Hang on, I'm just going to read the chat here.
It's just another street view of the beach we were looking at with the cars. And they have a different garbage there as well, metal one with a hole for bottles or something. But I guess the water doesn't often get up that high. I don't know.
It actually does.
It does, okay.
Yeah, it does. The tidal lines, the levels have got way higher, and a lot more of that, those dunes have been washed away in recent years. So you can certainly see, since I moved here actually, there is a big change in the amount of sand in that beach. Huge change, and not really good.
How did they justify reducing beach access to COVID? Like it seems like a pretty large area.
Yes.
Where people aren't going to be in close contact?
Yes. What happened in the early days of COVID when we were on the 2 and 5K? So many people live here now that groups of people gathered, and it was incredibly busy.
Okay.
And it was a public health issue.
Mm-hmm.
So the decision was made to stop car access and parking at that point. And there had been conversations about cars on the beach for a very, very long time. And I know that the council and many others had, you know, this issue didn't just start during COVID, but the decision to stop access happened over COVID. And it now seems to become I'm not sure if it's permanent, but it certainly hasn't, that stance hasn't changed since the restrictions were lifted. It seems that this is going to be the policy now here.
Nothing brings a community together like a pandemic, I guess.
I wonder if some people have realized this aspect of publicly accessible space being very little due to COVID, where all of a sudden you're reduced to your house and perhaps public space, depending on what stage of the lockdown you were at. But with shops closed, you found yourself in a situation where it was your house and other public spaces. But if not much space is public, where can you go?
Yeah, and I think for this conversation, part of the reason I took this as an example is that our access to green space, to shared space, to public space, you know, you can see the level of it's contested, and you can see that now, and how in certain environments and places where access was easy and taken for granted, maybe it's changed. It's not always so, and that conversation around who belongs and who doesn't, and who puts up the fence or the electric gate, or who decides to build on an access point. These are the things that you might not see from space. Who had a right of way because of whatever back in the day, and is that access point, should that still be there and honoured or not? And you're absolutely right. I mean, I know that I'm really lucky that this amenity is on my 2K, very lucky, but for an enormous amount of people, the only piece of outdoor space they had was their balcony, or maybe a teeny bit of green space in their housing development. So if we're talking about digitising green spaces, then again, this conversation is timely and incredibly important.
And another aspect I'm just thinking in terms of observation, both space and locally, combined with that access question and looking at the wider way of how people access the beach. You know, perhaps people cycle, or maybe people are discouraged from cycling, or maybe that data could show you that, you know, people need places to lock their bikes or safer place to lock, that it would actually encourage that behavior change. So I think, yeah, there's a lot of interesting ways to look at it in that way.
That's really interesting.
Carl, I would love that. Any chance you can come down and sort that this week? That's just brilliant, yeah. And I think we need to start thinking about those types of access as well, because again, they're going to be better for our health and better for emissions and all sorts of reasons. Yeah, exactly. And then the last thing I wanted to point out about this place, over lockdown, we have now developed a very strong community of sea swimmers. People who swim every single day, at different times of day and along different parts of that beach that they've chosen.
Wait, who came to this saying that they were interested in sea swimming? Who was that?
That's me. That's me. Yeah.
That's you.
Yeah. I've observed this since lockdown, and it's been one of the most joyful, joyous, incredible things that I have seen in terms of community. It's been phenomenal. Tinies, little ones, older adults, the whole thing. And there wouldn't have been a tradition of swimming every day here. Some people did, but not that many. Now, tell me, how can we support that community to continue being champions of open sea swimming? What could we do for them, you know? And I think this is a question that's happening all around the country. How could you track that? How could you use this data to build some businesses or initiatives around that? Support it, maybe.
Wow, that's a cool question. Carl,
want to see more of it.
Carl, you're
Yeah,
going
so-
to need to work on that.
But that was the angle, because I'm a keen sea swimmer. I know if anyone's heard this from yesterday, but yeah, and yeah, I've been doing it for a good few years, but seeing the huge explosion of it, particularly in the last year and a half, and you know, especially with water quality testing, councils only do it, you know, between May and September traditionally, but people are swimming well beyond those, and often throughout the year now. But then, you know, we don't know if the water is clean enough or it's safe to swim in. So that's where I started coming from with this hackathon, is thinking, you know, was trying to maybe track those numbers of people somehow and observe those new numbers of people quantified in some way, somehow to attach it to water quality testing, maybe to rainfall patterns, because, you know, our kind of wastewater treatment plants can't seem to handle when it's a lot of rain and flash flooding. So, and then the idea being then to inform things like maybe more facilities, more infrastructure, more local testing, and things like that. So yeah, I think there's a lot in that space that could be worked with.
Could we just briefly talk about toilets? Because there are not enough of them. All I can do is look at this beach and be like, oh my god, we're putting all these people on this beach. And you know they're peeing in the ocean, Carl. You know they are. So could we get some toilets, please? Yeah.
Yeah, again, it comes down to the most basic things in life. Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. I completely agree. Carl, I will watch that, your project with massive interest. And the other thing I would say to you, Carl, is what about community participation? Because those people are in the sea every day. Can you use their participation to help you do your thing?
Well, that's where I definitely need a team, and I definitely need someone who's more versed in coding than myself. But my thoughts was around, like a little basic geo app, some kind of ArcGIS thing that would complement that. So people could maybe just input, I swam today at X time in X location.
Mm-hmm.
Just really simple, really basic. That could be an addition to that. Kind of temporospatial observation, space observation.
Yeah. And somebody, by the way, thank you all for the chats, your messages. I'm reading them all here. So I think sewage being dumped into the water is more worrisome than pee.
Yes, okay.
So
It's just...
I don't know if this is also the case as it is in Ireland. It's like this in the UK. I am incredibly sorry to tell you, but unfortunately in Ireland, we do a horrific job of sewage wastewater management. It's really bad for the most part, and we are still putting way too much of it into our seas and rivers. So that is definitely another thing that we could certainly work on in terms of improving water quality by monitoring, testing, and using data for that, for sure. And please get on it. Sorry, Sabrina, I cut across you.
Oh no, I was just focused on peeing in the ocean. It's fine. Sewage is a much more important problem. Well, this has been really interesting, and I know, Mary, that you had a second challenge in mind, but we're coming to the end of our hour.
We're good. I'm really
and this
happy.
feels like a perfect place to wrap up by asking people if they have any questions. Do you guys have any questions or any other thoughts that you want to share before we say thank you to Mary and wrap up?
I'll have just one question, maybe. If no one else wants to go, I've talked a bit, so if someone else wants to speak, please go.
Go ahead.
I mean, in my work or just in research and stuff, I definitely get the feeling that I'm being tasked with things where it's like, you're in a desert, we're having a water balloon fight, and we want you to make the water balloons more water efficient, right? Where you're being given these constrained problems where you're like, okay, I'll try and make a slight improvement, but like we shouldn't be having a water fight, you know? Or it's like, yeah, just in society, we're looking for these incremental changes where it's going to have a trivial impact, where what we need is like a policy that just says, okay, like, you know, we're cutting parking in this area, or we're not adding more lanes to highway, or we're increasing gas tax or car tax, or you know, we're putting energy efficiency standards on cars, stuff like this, where it's like those would have huge impacts. So my question, I guess, is kind of like where do you go from that? Like, how do we live in this world where especially, you know, we can't always choose our battles, definitely in work. You know, you can be an activist as an individual, and it's not usually economically feasible to be an activist. Like, it doesn't make a lot of money because that's what you're fighting against. So yeah, any comments on that, I guess, in closing?
Do you think they'd be into gray water balloons? I mean, because I mean that is the reality of modern life. We do not have the civil or corporate appetite currently to do what needs to be done, and what needs to be done to preserve our beaches is, you know, not palatable to people. What needs to be done to preserve our water table is really not palatable, because people want to build their house and they want to bury their sewage tank and they want to have running water. And even if they agree on a macro level that those things should not be allowed in, for example, greenbelt spaces, on a micro level, they still want to be able to build their house, you know? And so I think that it's a broad cultural problem that, and it's the only place to really have an impact on that, in my experience, is on the policy level, and that, believe me, comes with its own set of problems. So I don't know of a really good solution to that problem. But as we were discussing yesterday, we could also make everybody read Project Hail Mary, and then we could figure out that, like, the Earth is going to be dominated by some weird whack thing, and we are all going to need to come together as a planet to literally save our lives in under 30 years. And I don't have a better plan, personally.
Well, for me, it comes down to education. It comes down to having this conversation. It comes down to your individual responsibility too. And I think more and more and more of us are coming together to, I suppose, raise the bar.
Yeah. I should say Mary is a much more positive person than I am.
I do think so. And I think, again, we have to think about why we always go for the short-term solutions. We use technology to say, okay, we'll plug the gap. There's too much, I don't know, there's always a snarl of traffic, of a jam here. So we're just going to do this, and then we're just going to push the problem to somewhere else. We actually need to have the moral leadership and courage to actually look at the causes and say, hang on. And a lot of these things comes back to social justice, and it comes back to poverty and injustice. And this is why we need to actually, again, think in those broader, larger terms, and start to actually bring people with us with language and education that people can understand. Because at the end of the day, we all really do want better for our kids and our grandkids. And you know what? There's a level of anxiety out there. People know. They know what's going on, but they don't know what to do. So we need to bring people with us and to try and help build this movement and build actions that we can take that's going to make this better. That's what I think.
See, this is why she comes and does the speaking. It's because she is inspirational and positive. And I'm like, yeah, it's too late. Oh, Mary, thank you so much for coming and talking to all of us. And thank you so much to all of our participants who spoke and sent messages and tuned in to this episode. I hope that you guys are looking forward to the next event, which is tomorrow night's gaming event, which we have is much more my kind of thing, because as you know, I have billed it as meet new people and then kill them. So
I'm not invited. Okay.
No, you. It's really not going to be your kind of thing. My pacifist friend Mary. All right. So that's it, guys. If there are no more questions, I think that we are going to wrap up, and I will get this recording up online as soon as humanly possible, which means tonight. Thanks
And
again.
the only other thing is a mentoring session will be
Oh, yes.
on Sunday.
Yes, so during the hackathon, in case you're not aware, there will be mentoring sessions that are open office hours. So Mary will be around for an hour. You're going to be welcome to pop in and have a chat with her, talk to her, ask questions, run ideas by her, or whatever. And we will have a full schedule of mentors and their office hours out next week. Okay? Thank you very much, guys.
Bye, folks. Best of luck and thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.